Good morning, afternoon or evening everybody. Welcome to part 8 of this scale model build series, Panther 44. The building and painting phase of the Panther is now complete. To go back in time and watch some of those videos, you can use the link above. Now, however, it's time to build the diorama. This episode will focus on the foundations. I'll be cutting the foam, building a wall, and laying some interesting groundwork ready for the next stage. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Every diorama project starts with a bit of planning. I use some graph paper to play around with layouts and sizes until I have a vague idea of what I'm doing. Once I have a size and idea in my head, I can get cracking cutting out the base. I start by marking up a piece of 20mm blue foam to the size I require. This foam is XPS insulation foam from Amazon. This stuff works like any modeling foam, but when bought in bulk, is a lot more cost-effective. Once I have the overall size drawn, I cut it to size using my budget wire cutter from eBay. It's not the best, and takes an age to cut the foam. Here's the actual speed of cutting, but it does the job for now. I repeat this process with another piece of foam to double the thickness of the base. This will give me the depth I need to cut the grass bank out of it later down the line. I am making a circle-shaped diorama, so the next stage is to measure and find the central point of the foam, then mark a circle using a compass. To hold the two layers of foam together when cutting, I stab some cocktail sticks through, like you would a tall cake. I trim the tops off, just so I don't accidentally stab myself while cutting it out. Now it's time to start cutting. I roughly cut off some larger chunks first, just to get closer to the line drawn with the compass. Next, I start cutting the circle out, carefully following the line as close as possible. I will be adding a rough texture to the outside of the base, so it isn't vital this is perfectly smooth, but we still want it to be a decent shape. Cutting in small chunks helps with this. It's crucial to keep cutting in a fluent motion. If you stop, then the wire will continue to melt the foam in that position, resulting in big gouges out of the side. After a fair while, the shape is cut. Now it's time to glue the two pieces of foam together to give me one chunky base. I split the layers apart and put a generous layer of PVA glue down. I then use the cocktail sticks to realign and join the pieces together. I put a weight on top of it whilst it cured to ensure a good hold. After around 24 hours or so, the base is cured and ready to start plotting the features onto it. I start by drawing the line where the grass bank will go, then I remove the cocktail sticks. The last one was having none of it. To figure out the length of wall I need, I place the tank down to figure out how wide I want the road to be. I play around with the positioning until I am happy, then I draw the position where the wall will go. This enables me to get a measurement of the length of the wall required, so I can start planning what the wall will look like. Whenever making walls or buildings, it's always good to have a drawing of what you are going to create. In this case, I have drawn out the wall and all the details onto some 1mm graph paper. This I can then use as a template. I fold the bottom of the paper to give me a square edge to line up with a piece of foam. I then trace over all my lines and details. This does take a bit of time, but once complete, will give me an accurate copy of the outline and all the details indented into the foam. With my image now imprinted onto my wall, I start to carve the details into it using a sharp scalpel blade. I am only really cutting through the outer surface here, being careful not to cut too deep. These shallow cuts we will use to enhance the details of the wall later on. Once all the lines are cut, it's time to whip out the trusty wire cutter and cut the outline shape of the wall out. The order of these processes isn't really important. As you will see later, I engraved the other side after cutting out the overall shape. When the shape is cut out, it leaves the top side of the broken wall very smooth, which looks a bit odd. So I cut out some random cuts and gouges where I will add loose stone and brick later down the line. The foam is quite malleable, so I use my fingers just to press in areas and smooth the sharp edges a tad. That's the overall shape cut and detail initially carved. The same was done on the reverse side, with a few subtle changes. Now it's time to add some depth to the details on the wall. I start with a palette knife, gently pressing against the surfaces I want to be slightly more indented than the top slabs. This also adds a bit of variation to the surface of the plaster, making the surface less level. Next, I get a smaller palette knife and start pressing in the brick layer. This gives a bit of thickness to the plaster that is left remaining on the wall. I use the end of the palette knife to almost cut into the edge to give a sharp outline to the plaster layer. As I work around the model, I add in the details to the inside of the arch. It's the same process really. Draw on the detail, carve with a scalpel and press in the bricks to add that depth. The process is repeated across the entire wall. Once complete, it really does add a three-dimensional element to the foam and start to make it look authentic. I use this opportunity to add a bit of further damage to the wall in the form of bullet holes. I simply twist the end of the scalpel blade to create the hole, then add some cracks. I use a graphite stick for the thicker cracks, then use a drafting pencil to add in some finer cracks into the surface. Next, it's time to add some definition to the bricks. I start by running a graphite stick in the cuts made by the scalpel. This splits the bricks apart slightly, which will allow me to add grout later down the line. I also use a palette knife to press in some of the bricks. Again, this just adds a three-dimensional feel to the wall and a bit of variation between bricks. I go around the whole wall with the graphite stick and a pencil, adding definition to the bricks and adding cracks and damage as I go. Once this process is complete, the wall really does start to take shape. It's already starting to look more natural and will look even better once some grout and texture is added later. With the wall done for now, I move on to working out the composition of the base. I place the wall and draw on where I want the road and path to be. The idea in my head was to overlay the road sections of the model with this 3mm cork, of which I will break up and crack to add some features to the otherwise flat surface. To do this though, it requires me to cut the road parts of the foam down by 3mm, so the road sits flush with the grass edges. To be able to cut the road down, it also requires me to cut the foam base into sections to be able to slice the 3mm off the top face. Once I have the road section separated, I measure the wire cutter guide to 3mm, then slice off the layer I need removing. Next, I decide this is a good time to cut out the grass bank, so I take the measurements from the slice I have just removed, then cut the bank in the angle I want. This part is just a bit of guesswork really, just ensuring I leave enough meat on the bottom of the bank so I still have an edge. If you haven't done already, and you are finding this video helpful, or even mildly entertaining, can I please ask you hit those like and subscribe buttons and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I am hopeful of some bigger, better videos to come in the future, and every click, type and comment really helps me along the way. Thank you. To smooth out some of the bumpy cut lines from the grass bank, I simply press the foam with my fingers. I will be covering the whole thing in filler in the next episode anyway, but getting rid of any sharp edges aids that process. With the 3mm layer removed and the bank cut, we can finally start to see how the final composition will look. I have this old piece of cork covered in filler left over from another project, so I decide to try and utilize it here. But first I need to prepare the dirt track that will sit behind the arch. This again involves cutting the pieces into 3 and removing 3mm off of the middle chunk, which will be my path. Now it's back to the cork road. I start breaking the cork and plaster combo into pieces and placing them on the model. You can see this combination, when bent and broken, gives you really realistic cracks, of which I am hoping to make a feature of on my dried out dirt road. I'm not sticking it down at the moment, just getting an idea of how I will do it later on. After playing around with that for a bit, I decide it's time to stick the base back together. To give the diorama some stability, I'm going to mount it onto a piece of old grey board. I use cocktail sticks to temporarily hold the pieces together, so I can draw around it, giving me the shape I need. I then cut out the circle using a sharp scalpel blade, being as accurate to the guideline as possible. Once cut, I line up my pieces with the Greyboard circle and remove the cocktail sticks. Now I am ready to start gluing it down to the board using a healthy layer of PVA glue. I spread the surface evenly with the glue, then add some more for good luck. I then start simply gluing the pieces down onto the circle and adding more PVA glue between the pieces to ensure a good hold. With all the pieces in place, I reinsert the cocktail sticks to hold it together whilst it cures. I place some weights on the top and put it aside for a good 24 hours to let it dry properly. When it's cured, I take out the cocktail sticks, of which have glued in place, so require a little bit of help from some pliers. Next, it's time to finally glue down the cracked corkboard to create the foundations of our dirt road. I start by laying down a healthy layer of PVA glue. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost the footage of me actually gluing all the cork pieces in place. In essence, though, I break it up into chunks and fit them together like a loose jigsaw puzzle. Hopefully the pictures give a good indication on how it's done. With the road laid, I turn my attention back onto the wall. The edges need trimming to size, so I start cutting one end flush with the base. Unfortunately, I had worn out the blade, so had to do a quick switch. When working with foam, it is crucial to have a really sharp blade, otherwise it will tear the foam rather than slice through it. With a sharp blade fitted, I continue to cut the excess off the wall. I do this slowly but surely. We can always cut more foam off, but sticking it back on is a pain in the arse. The wall is stuck down next, again using PVA glue and pins. I push the pins into locations that won't be seen once the filler is added, so between bricks and where the wall is damaged, they will stay in place permanently. I left the top of the arch oversized to give it some stability when carving the detail, but now it is glued and pinned in place. I can cut this off, again using a sharp scalpel. The final task to do is to trim the other side of the wall and the cork to match the circular base. For the grass bank edge, I simply angle the blade and carefully cut along the edge. I am being as accurate as I can, but any small mishaps will be covered by the filler anyway. And that is it. Foundations for the diorama laid. Next time out, we will be adding filler and adding some more details to this diorama, so stay tuned for that. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, happy modeling, everybody.